Hello, everybody. I am the Dependent Fanatic, and today I'm going to be talking about results of national championship contenders after week one. If you remember a couple weeks ago, you might have not seen it. I'll put it in a card up here above, but I had one word for every national championship contender. And after week one, you could add a couple, but these are the results of the words that I had for all of those teams and kind of some stats and statistics that back it up. But I think that all of these college football head coaches listened to Dependent Fanatic and his word for every team. I'm just going to go ahead and prove it. Alabama, right now, their word was roots. We're going in alphabetical order here this time. Roots was what I had for Alabama. Get back to your roots. And they did. 56-7 versus Middle Tennessee State. They ran the ball 40 times and had 205 rushing yards, which is a 5.1 average. I don't know how they got that. It doesn't add up to me. It's a 5 average. 5.1, I guess them extra 5 yards. Yeah, that makes sense. Checks out. They had 5 rushing touchdowns, too. 8 players had carries, including Jalen Milroe, the quarterback. He had 7 carries for 48 yards and a 6.9 average, 2 touchdowns. Passing the ball, he had 13 of 18 for 194 yards, 3 touchdowns. Bond, Burton, and Niblick flashed receiving the ball for Alabama. Their defense was pretty good. They held Middle Tennessee to 211 yards, and they had 2 takeaways. So they did go back to their roots. Alabama is right in stride, cruising right now at this moment. Clemson. Boy, what was my word for Clemson? Do you remember? It was forgotten. Forgotten was my word for Clemson, and they sure are, aren't they? They lost 7-28 to Duke on the road. Rushing the ball, only 3 players have rushing statistics for Clemson from that game. What? Wow. Will Shipley had 7 for 114 yards, 6.7 average. If it wasn't for him, Clemson would have had no offense. They would have really been hurting in this game. Maffa and Klubnik had the other 99 yards total rushing the ball. The ball was spread around receiving-wise, but Klubnik needed 43 passes to get a 4.9 average per completion. Not very good. Clemson had 3 turnovers, a couple inside their own, inside the opponent 10-yard line. But the defense allowed 347 yards. So, forgotten, are they? Will they be? Florida State is next, alphabetical order. My word for them was physicality. What did they go out and do? They beat LSU 45-24. Outscored them, 17-7 at 17 at halftime. It was tied up. So 28-7 in the second half. They allowed 460 total yards, but physical on third down. They were 3rd and 10 on third down and 0 for 3 on 4th down, LSU was. Florida State only had 135 rushing yards, but controlled the time of possession by 10 plus minutes, almost 10 and a half minutes. Jordan Travis was 23 of 31 for 342 yards, 4 touchdowns to 1 interception. In receiving the ball, Keon Coleman, the transfer from Michigan State, had 9 catches for 122 yards and 3 touchdowns. Johnny Wilson had 7 catches for 104 yards. So they did get a little bit more physical, like I said they should. Georgia, my word for them was repeat. They won 48-7 versus Tennessee Martin. Some things were a little bit concerning, though. Rushing the ball, they had 30 carries for only 159 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. Milton and Roderick Robinson both had 6-yard averages for 50 yards or more. Carson Beck So that was a little bit concerning versus Tennessee Martin. But Carson Beck was 21 of 31 for 294 yards and 1 touchdown. 7 receivers for Georgia had a 12-plus average per catch. So that is pretty good for Carson Beck. He's got weapons, he's got help, he's got an offensive line. They'll be just fine. Defensively, Georgia had 262 yards allowed and 1 takeaway on Saturday. Time of possession was even. So just interesting. Michigan is next. I said their word is pass the ball. It was 30-3 versus ECU, and ECU forced them to pass the ball. So that pretty much helped my case. J.J. McCarthy came out and was 26 of 30 for 280 yards and 3 touchdowns. Rushing the ball was a concern because they were loading that box. 31 carries for 122 yards, 3.9 average, and only 1 touchdown. But Corum did have only 10 carries. He had 73 yards and 1 touchdown. Receiving the ball, 4 players with 14-plus average catch or better. Wilson and Johnson had 149 total yards receiving between them. And 3 touchdowns for Roman Wilson. Defensively, Michigan had 235 yards allowed and 1 takeaway. Notre Dame's word was Marshall. And this is going to be short and sweet for Notre Dame. They played 2 such teams and handled business. Enough said there. Ohio State, my word for them was run. It was 23-3 at Indiana. For Ohio State, rushing the ball, they had 31 carries for 143 yards, which is a 4.6 average and 2 touchdowns. Chip Trayanum was the best. He had 8 carries for 57 yards, and that's a 7.1 average, so promising there. And Mayan Williams did okay, but passing the ball, McCord, for Ohio State, this was the question. 20 of 33 for 239 yards and 1 interception. Not terrible, not great. Harrison Jr. and Ebeka were shut down. So if you factor that in for Ohio State, then McCord did pretty good. But like Mark Rogers said on the Michigan podcast, throw the ball into the end zone, lead your receiver. It would have been a touchdown to Marvin Harrison Jr., but it is what it is. The defense, though, allowed only 153 yards to Indiana. But it looked like Indiana was just content with not even scoring the ball. They're just going to milk the clock. And that's what they did. Hurt Ohio State stats a little bit, but it is what it is. Oregon is now taking the place of LSU. They have moved up here. Flash was my word. And boy, was it flashy. I thought it was going to be in the opposite direction. Business-like, control it. And maybe it was. It's Portland State. They just beat the bejesus out of them. Bo Nix was 23 of 27 with 287 yards and 3 touchdowns, and he was pulled relatively early, so it could have been a lot better. Rushing the ball, Oregon had 34 rushes for 348 yards, 7 touchdowns. 4 players had over 50 yards with at least 1 touchdown. Receiving the ball, they had 33 receptions as a team for 381 yards, 4 touchdowns. Troy Franklin led the way with 7 catches for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. Bryant Jr. had 7 catches and 100 yards for 2 touchdowns as well. Defensively, Oregon looked good. 200 yards allowed and 1 takeaway. Hey. Penn State's word was Aller. And boy, did he deliver. He was 21 of 29 for 325 yards and 3 touchdowns, but receiving the ball, he had help. 6 players with an average of 10-plus yards per catch, and Keandre Swift, here's the stat of the week. Keandre Lambert-Smith had 4 catches for 123 yards and 2 touchdowns. Rushing the ball, they did pretty good, 35 rushes for 146 yards and 2 touchdowns, and the defense was pretty stellar against West Virginia. Here we go, rounding out the 12 teams that will be in a future playoff. That's why I'm doing it. 12 teams. We only have 4 right now that will get into the playoff, but I think all these 12 teams are capable of getting in there. USC, my word for them was compliment. Defensively is what I was talking about. They've played San Jose State and Nevada, blew them both out, but defensively didn't look very good. Uh, 396 yards allowed to San Jose State and 24 points. They allowed 198 rushing yards to San Jose State. Now, I know it's game 1, and San Jose State took a step back. In playing Oregon State. Oregon State whooped their ass, but USC took a lot out of them, I would say. But then you back that up, you give up 360 yards to Nevada and 14 points. 49 rushing yards, though, allowed was much better. So can they continue to complement that offense with Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley? Texas. It was mindset for them going in, as was my word. They beat Rice 37-10. They ran the ball, but 39 rushes, 158 yards, 4.1 average, kind of weak. Only 1 touchdown rushing the ball versus Rice. Receiving, they had 7 players with 11 plus average reception, so that's pretty good. Xavier Worthy, a transfer from Michigan a couple years back, 7 catches for 90 yards. Defensively, looked pretty good against Rice. 176 yards allowed and 3 takeaways on defense. Utah's word was underappreciated or unappreciated. And all they did was beat Florida 24-11. Without Cam Rising, Utah made Florida look foolish. Utah won by 13 points while only having 270 total yards offensively. Ouch. But defensively, Utah was pretty good, considering Graham Mertz was their only offense, and he did pretty good. But 346 yards allowed, only 13 rushing yards allowed for Utah, and they had the 1 takeaway. So there you have it. LSU's, by the way, word was maintain, and they did. They maintained that they lost to Florida State in the first game of the season. So they definitely maintained that. They still have a chance to go to the playoff and win a national championship, but they have the chance. I'm not saying they're going to. These teams have a chance. LSU still does. It was a non-conference game. They still have the SEC slate. If they go through that undefeated the rest of the way, they're in the playoffs. So there you have it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. It's the recap of national championship contenders. If I'm missing one, like I said, I think I'm missing a couple. Washington looked pretty good. They might be one of them. Oregon State. The Pac-12 went undefeated this weekend. The only conference that did that. So there you have that. There might be others. Let me know down below how you enjoyed this video, or if you hated it. Put down your teams that I am missing, and have a great night, everybody.